Welcome to our first Lunch and Learn on building resilience. This presentation is based off the work of Dr. Madeline Levine, so I wanted to give you some background information on her. She has over 35 years of experience as a clinician, consultant, educator, and author. Her books, The Price of Privilege and Teach Your Children Well, were both New York Times bestsellers. So what is resiliency? Resiliency is the ability to adapt to stress, adversity, and life challenges. I often explain this to kids as that ability to bounce back when negative things happen. I also want to touch on the concept of anti-fragility because it ties into this. Anti-fragility refers to systems that grow from stress. So some examples are trees. So trees need the stress of wind to make their roots grow deeper and wider. Without the wind, trees' root systems are underdeveloped, which causes them to fall over as they get bigger because they can't support themselves. For humans, a great example of this is our immune system. As we get exposed to bacteria and viruses, our immune system strengthens and grows, and it takes us from when we're little and we get sick multiple times a month to where we get sick maybe a couple times a year, if that. But this is the case for resiliency too. Those small stressors help us build that adaptability. So as we go through this, I'm going to make that connection to trees and resiliency. So those stressors, thinking of that as the wind and that being opportunities for us to grow our resiliency, strengthen our roots to be able to stand up when our problems get bigger later on. So in our district, we have a tool that measures resiliency. It's called the Terrace Metrics. We offer it to all 4th, 7th, and 9th grade students. Parents have to opt in their students for them to take this, and this was sent out about a month ago. We typically do it around the month of October. Each year, we've done it for a couple of years now. For the most part, the campuses are done with this. There might be one left. I'm getting some kids who were absent when they were doing the testing. But for the most part, we're done with it. This assessment looks at resiliency and risk indicators, which you can see on the screen. So grit is looking at that perseverance that helps us stick with challenges and not necessarily getting distracted by the next shiny thing that comes along. Hope is that ability to develop multiple strategies when something is blocking a goal, and that motivation to pursue each one until we're successful. Global satisfaction are their higher levels of positive life outlook, measuring an individual's current view about themselves and their future. Positive school experiences examines attitudes towards teachers and overall school experience. And for our risk indicators, we look at anxiety, which examines general worries, which aren't specific to any one source. Look at depression, which is those feelings of sadness or hopelessness that can make it hard to stay motivated. And we also look at ostracism, which assesses the levels of perceived isolation from others. Can be, feeling ignored or being actively excluded. So each of these items are scored on a continuum from optimal to may need assistance that you can see on the screen. If a student's overall score indicates that they may need assistance, we talk to those students, have a conversation with them about their answers, make sure they understood what the question was asking. And then we also connect with parents and fill them in on that conversation. This assessment has helped us identify some of those students who were keeping things inside that we may not have known were struggling otherwise. So it can be a useful tool sometimes. At the end of it, a parent summary is sent to parents that has some suggestions, has the rating scales for each of the indicators that was assessed, and a link to the Terrace Metrics website that has their own little parent portal with suggestions for the different areas. And this wasn't intentional, however, the timing with this assessment is perfect because of our presentation today. We're going to be giving you a number of strategies and suggestions for helping students strengthen their resiliency skills. Because of the timing of this, we're going to briefly point out the connections between the skills that we're presenting on and the areas that it relates to the Terrace Metrics for anyone who's interested. So like I mentioned earlier today, we're going to be reviewing Dr. Madeline Levine's work, focusing on her 7 essential skills. I'm also going to tie in strategies from previous book studies that we've done, like Love and Logic and The Anxious Generation, because we like to tie those in for people. The first essential skill that we're going to be covering today is resourcefulness. Resourcefulness is the idea that kids can handle it instead of always turning to their parents, their teacher, or an adult to figure out things for them. Some of the ways that we can help foster resourcefulness is by allowing kids to make small, affordable mistakes. Love and Logic talks about letting them make mistakes when they're young. Think back to the wind in the trees. So having them, giving those opportunities to grow those skills. The more mistakes that they can make and deal with their consequences, the better off they're going to be. So we want to think of these affordable mistakes as opportunity for them to grow and learn. If they can do things like pack their own snack, pack a lunch, even if they forget their water bottle or leave out their vegetables, it's okay because these mistakes are affordable. We want to try to empower them and give them as many opportunities as we can for them to be resourceful and do things on their own. You also want to share with them how you solve your own problems. Tell them about small, kid-friendly problems, maybe that you had at work or with a friend, and talk through how you resolved it. You can brainstorm different options you had for resolving the problem and how you picked the best option for you. We want them to understand that there's not just one right answer. There can be multiple solutions to a problem, and helping them look at that. For our little ones, this ties in well with Kelso's Choices that is taught throughout the district on the elementary school level. Kelso's a little frog character. He's got 9 different ways to solve problems, and we teach kids how to use these choices to solve their small problems. So at school, if they come up to an adult and they have one of those small problems, we will sometimes put it back on them and ask them to try 2 choices first. It can help them problem solve right away. Like, okay, what are some good options from Kelso's Choices that you can try in this situation? Lastly, we want to teach them how to self-soothe or self-regulate. At school, we teach kids how to walk away or take a break, maybe go get a drink, do a quick body movement break, take some deep breaths. We can also teach kids some scripts that they can repeat to themselves, such as I can handle this, have some catchy songs that we use sometimes in elementary school that go along with worry, like worry bug, go away, I'm going to have some fun today. You can also model these things at home with them and practice along with them. Our job is to help them grow from needing us to self-soothe them and be that co-regulator to them being able to soothe themselves on their own. And of course, that's not to say that there's going to be times of extra stress where they're going to need that co-regulation and extra support. But the goal is for them to not have to come to you every time that they're stressed and needing that self-soothing from you. Things we want to try to avoid is jumping in too early and trying to rescue them or solve the problem for them. That growth is in the struggle. And when we rescue them, we're giving them that message of like, you're right, you can't handle this. And that's not the message that we want to be sending to them. We also want to avoid being impatient with their limited resources, especially while they're young and we're trying to give them more responsibilities. It can be really hard to watch them clean up a spill or a big mess, or even just watching them pack their lunch or their own bag because they might not be doing it how we want them to do it or might be forgetting things every now and then. But we need to find patience within ourselves to allow them to do these things. And that also might mean us needing to make some adjustments to our schedule so that they have time to do these things on their own. Maybe making some extra time in the morning or the night before to do some prep work so it's not as rushed in the morning and stressful, and gives us the opportunity to not be as impatient with them. But we want to give them these opportunities to build their independence and learn that, like, I can handle this. And I can do these things. The Terrace metrics indicator that goes along with resourcefulness is grit. Both resourcefulness and grit involve overcoming obstacles and finding ways to achieve goals despite challenges. Resourcefulness helps in using available resources effectively, much like grit focuses on perseverance to reach goals. One of my favorite quotes from Love and Logic is, if we never let kids struggle to get something that they want or work through a problem for themselves, then when things get difficult later in life, they won't suddenly turn tough and get going. Instead, they'll just quit. It's just a reminder that they need those struggles so they can come to understand that they can handle it. They can do difficult things. Otherwise, they'll just give up and let us do it if we're jumping in and rescuing them. If we continue to rescue them, they learn that they don't have to persevere and that they can just quit and someone else will figure it out for them. Our next essential skill is enthusiasm, having that I love this mentality instead of the whatever mentality that we see a lot in adolescence. To help with enthusiasm, we want to encourage interest and keep in mind that their interests aren't our interest. So it's likely that there's going to be times where we get tired of whatever they're talking about, or we have no interest in the topic, whether it's Legos, fossils, anime, whatever it might be that they're into. We want to make sure that we're not shutting it down from the lack of our own interest in it. We can also have conversations with them about our own passions, things that we like, things that we're excited about, our hobbies, and this can help model that enthusiasm for them. For things we want to try to avoid, we don't want to show disappointment when they're no longer enthusiastic over something that they previously enjoyed. It's natural for people's interest to change, especially as kids develop and their brains grow. As they go through transitions, what they like and have interest in is going to change, and that's okay. There's also groups of kids who get really focused in on a specific interest, and once they're done with it, they're done. And that's not necessarily a cause for concern as long as they still have things that they're enjoying and that they're interested in. We also don't want to use our approval as a way of manipulating their interest. So an example would be if they really enjoy something, we don't want to be making comments of like, no child of mine is going to be doing this or whatever it might be. Because when you make statements like that, it's more likely to drive a wedge in between us and our kids versus changing their interest. This ties into the resiliency indicator of hope. Enthusiasm is closely linked to hope. It's that outward expression of hope, showing motivation and energy towards the world. The next essential skill is creativity. That's helping our kids think about how we can look at this differently and not just what's the right answer. This can tie again back to Kelso's choices. Like, tell me a couple of things that you can do to solve this problem, and seeing that there are different perspectives. To help foster creativity, we want to make sure that we have plenty of materials on hand that can encourage creative expression. That might mean having hammers, nails, woods, paint, bed sheets, things that kids can use to build, create, and develop those interests. We also want to show enthusiasm when they make creative productions, whether it's out of clay or food, even if it's something that's not edible and they've put all these different ingredients together and made this non-edible pizza. Or if they're inviting friends over to do a concert and they've told them to bring whatever noise-making object they can come up with, we want to show some enthusiasm with that and help foster that creativity. We also want to allow for unstructured play. This is something we talked a lot about in the book study for the anxious generation. A lot of kids are already in plenty of structured activities like sports, theaters, scouts, whatever it might be. And when they have that downtime, we want to make sure that we have those materials available, that we don't necessarily have to go out and buy things for them, but letting them know what's allowable in the house, that they can use couch cushions, bed sheets, whatever to make a fort. Allowing them that time for unstructured play, which helps them develop more flexible problem-solving skills, especially if they're playing with peers. Even if it's peers who are different ages, it's actually better to have that diversity because we learn from older kids and can be mentor for younger kids, just kids who are out in the neighborhood. We want to keep in mind that when we get involved, we tend to add structure to the play. And so letting them have that time to where they can figure things out. Things we want to avoid because they tend to deter from creativity is screen time. Again, this goes back to the Anxious Generation book study that we just finished, but we discussed some of the different harms that can come from screen time. It's really prevalent for kids to be playing video games and connected with others in the virtual world, but not necessarily in the real world, right? Jonathan Haidt talked about that opportunity cost that comes with the online community, and just keeping in mind what are they missing out on from being in front of a screen. And some of the things that they miss out on is opportunity to learn that problem solving, to build those interpersonal skills and creativity, which helps us foster this resiliency. When we're online with somebody and we get upset, we don't necessarily have to learn conflict resolution. We can just turn off the chat or not talk to them, right? It's a lot easier to disengage, and there's not as much social risk involved with that. So we want to make sure that we're putting some limits in place with that. And of course, kids are going to be on screen and there's going to be times for that, but just limiting that and keeping in mind what's the opportunity cost that's coming along with this. Lastly, we don't want to expect them to be notably creatable without putting in the time. So if they want to be an artist, musician, or athlete, whatever it might be, they're going to have to put in time to really develop those skills. The resiliency indicator that this connects to is global satisfaction. Creativity can foster a positive outlook and a sense of satisfaction in life. The more satisfied one feels about life, the more open they might be to innovation or creative problem-solving solutions. Our next essential skill is good work ethic. It's the mindset of I'm going to keep at this versus I quit. To encourage good work ethic, we want to model enthusiasm around hard work. With this comes praising effort over outcome, which helps build a growth mindset. Instead of being focused on specific grades or how something is supposed to look at the end, we want to focus on the effort. So saying things like, you put a lot of effort into this assignment, or if we're talking about sports, we can say things like good hustle, or I can see that you've been working on communicating more with your teammates on the court. So talking about, what it is that they're working hard on. We also want to make sure that expectations are reasonable and doable. So an example for this is homework. If a kid is bringing home work that takes them hours to do, and it's to the point where they're overwhelmed and no amount of effort that they put in is going to make it doable, then we want to make sure that we're communicating with the school and their teachers, because it needs to be realistic for them. The last thing to do for work ethic is including things like integrity, perseverance, communication, and collaboration. Our kids with strong social skills may get overlooked at times and be told to socialize less and study more, which sometimes might be needed, right? But we also want to praise their ability to communicate and collaborate, because those are skills that are going to be sought after in the workforce, and things that are going to help them in the long run. Things we want to avoid are things like worrying about them being mad if we set boundaries. It's okay to have rules and expectations. We don't want to be a drill sergeant about it, where we tell them what to do, when to do it, how to do it without any input from them. But we want to set boundaries with this consultant parenting style by helping kids learn that self-discipline and self-management. For those who haven't heard of consultant parenting before, it comes from Love and Logic, and the goal is to offer guidance and alternatives without taking over for them, allowing them to make their decisions and learn from their consequences, not rescuing them from them. We also want to avoid expecting perfectionism. It's unrealistic for anyone to be perfect at everything, and we're going to have certain things that we're good at and areas that we struggle in. We want to focus on the focus to be on trying our best. And if we make a mistake, that's okay. That's how we learn. If we stumble, it's an opportunity for us to find a better way to work. Next, we don't want to take over for our children. So there's been some studies that what the researchers do, they give kids a puzzle that they know is too hard for the kid to solve. And some of these studies, the parents are told ahead of time not to step in and help the kid. And the researchers watch the reactions of the kids and the parents, and they measure different things. So one of these studies found that when parents step in and take over on these puzzles, on this task that's too hard for the kids give up a lot quicker versus when the parents don't step in, they persevere and try longer. There's also been a similar study, same situation, where the kid's given a task or a puzzle that is too difficult for them or really difficult. Parents are told not to step in, but this study measured stress responses, and it found that when parents stepped in, their stress levels went down, but the kids' stress levels went up. So you want to keep that in mind when we have that urge to step in and take over for them, because it can be hard to watch our kids struggle. Or we might be getting impatient with them, right? Depending on what's going on, we want to pause and ask ourselves, is this going to soothe my anxiety? Is this for me? Am I taking away an opportunity for them to learn and grow? Am I shielding them from that wind that they need to grow? Another quote from Foster Klein, if there's at least a 20% chance our child might be able to make it work, we want to keep clear of owning the problem and not rob our child of the opportunity to learn and grow from the experience. So even if there's a small chance that they can do it, we want them to try. And if they don't succeed, that's an opportunity of growth for them to learn. And if they do succeed, what a great experience for them to show, like, hey, I can do this. I can do hard things. So this relates to the resilience indicator of positive school experience on the Terrace metrics. A good work ethic is nurtured by a positive experience in school or in environments where effort is encouraged and appreciated. Students who have a positive school experience are more likely to develop a strong work ethic. So our next one is self-control. This idea that this just doesn't feel right instead of all the kids are doing it. So the do's to model good self-management strategies. So we want to think about things like when we're in the car and someone cuts us off or someone's being a crazy driver. How do we automatically react? If we lose it and start screaming and yelling, that's what we're modeling for our kid. And so, don't be surprised in situations when that happens when our kids react the same way. That's true for when we're at sporting events. You may not like a call that a ref made, but how do you handle yourself? Are we keeping it calm and collected, or are we having a strong reaction to it? We just want to be aware that our kids are always watching and we're modeling those behaviors. Another do is to allow our kids to have moderate levels of distress. Again, thinking about the wind in the trees and how that relates to our resiliency. For things like homework, if they're asking for help right away, we want to let them try and struggle a little bit before stepping in, or having them, show our work, like, okay, what are you thinking about? How do you think you can solve this right now? And just doing as little as you can to help. Some other things are things that we notice are lunches. If they forget their lunch or their snack one day, it's okay. They can figure out solutions for themselves, and it's not necessarily that we have to be bringing their food for them now, because they can find solutions. That goes back to the not jumping in and rescuing them, letting them to have that experience of like, yeah, that was kind of hard, but I can handle it and I can get through it. I don't need someone to fix every problem for me. You also want to show that you value their ability to go against a crowd. So an example that comes to mind is, say you've got a kid who maybe in our household, iPhones and social media is not allowed, right? But that's a common thing, especially as they get into secondary, that lots of kids have these things. If your kid is standing up for themselves and going against the crowd, and not falling into that trap of like, well, I have to get a social media account or I have to do this because everyone else is doing it. We want to praise them for that, and show that like we see that they are making that choice and are, might not be easy for them to go against the crowd, but they're standing on their own and making that decision. Things we want to try to avoid when we're fostering self-control are not expecting them to learn it without our guidance. So we have to model self-control for them. You also want to try to avoid dismissing their negative feelings. So using empathy, which goes back again to love and logic. So we want to tune into their feelings, help them brainstorm strategies, and solving solutions to their problems. We want to let them know that we recognize like, wow, this is really hard, or this is really frustrating for you. Or that was really hard for you that you failed your math test, or that was really upsetting for you that you didn't get invited to that birthday party. So validating those feelings, tuning into how they're feeling in that situation, and then helping them brainstorm and problem solve, which is an example of that collaborative parenting that we referred to earlier. The Terrace metrics indicator that goes along with self-control is depression. When we have self-control, we have more of a sense of agency, which means that we have control and influence on the things around us instead of feeling stuck and that things are just happening to us. Our next one is self-esteem, where we're feeling good about ourselves instead of feeling like, ugh, I suck at this. To help with self-esteem, we want to encourage our kids to work outside of their comfort zone. Leader in Me teaches students the difference between comfort zone versus courage zone, which I think for some of our campuses recently are doing this care class lesson. When we're staying in our comfort zone, we're not pushing ourselves to do things that we're not used to, or that might make us feel uncomfortable. So if we look at this related to anxiety, if I'm staying in my comfort zone, I'm probably avoiding things. I'm not doing things that make me feel uncomfortable or feel anxious, which could potentially be impacting things like school attendance or hanging out with friends, or doing things that are making us feel nervous. But when we step into our courage zone and lean into that, it might be situations that cause us anxiety, but it is an opportunity to build that confidence and that self-esteem and say, you know what, I can handle this. I can do this. We also want to let them know that we have confidence in their ability, which comes from an accumulation of skills. So it makes me think of watching kids learn how to swim, especially when they're younger and developmentally aren't in a place where they've quite figured out how to make their body do different things at the same time, like combining moving their arms in a certain motion and kicking their legs separately to help them propel through the water. You can see in those moments like their brain trying to stack those skills on top of each other, and that process happening and the practice that's involved in it. So in those moments when our kids are frustrated because they're struggling to stack those skills, can let them know like, you know what, like you've got this. I know it's hard right now and you're struggling with this, but you're gonna get to where you need to be. We also want to break down their goals into smaller goals. If they have a big, lofty goal, we want to make sure that we help them scaffold it and break it down into smaller goals where it is attainable and achievable so they can feel good about it. Because if they have this big thing in mind, and it's got 20 different steps involved, and they get stuck on step 3, and that self-esteem starts coming down, right? That grit and all those things start coming into play. We want to help them break that down so that they can have those small achievable steps along the way and those small successes. Things we want to avoid is signing them up for everything that they show interest in. The quickest way to discourage a new interest is to turn their play into an organized activity. I know for some of us, this is really hard, especially for kids not interested in a lot of things. So when they show a spark of interest, we just want to latch on to it and encourage it. And we can encourage it through their play and not necessarily turning it into something that is structured and now has a lot of rules around it. We want to let them grow that interest And if later they say, hey, I want to take some dance classes, or I would like to learn how to play guitar and take some lessons, then we can turn it into an organized activity. But while it's this budding interest, we want to give them the space and opportunity to develop that. We also don't want to let our kids shift responsibilities of difficulties onto others. So when we defer our responsibilities, we have that lack of accountability, and that mindset makes us less competent and ultimately can lower our self-esteem. It goes back to this sense of control that we were talking about earlier. When we allow our kids to pawn off responsibility, we encourage the idea that someone else is responsible both for the problem and for fixing it. We also don't want to praise indiscriminately. Praise should be specific and focused on that effort, like we talked about before, as well as perseverance and practice. So instead of saying things like good job, we want to have it be more specific, like you worked really hard on that puzzle, or I saw you focusing for 10 minutes. That was awesome. Also can be things like, I know reading is really hard and you made it through those 2 pages. What this relates to Terrace metrics is the resiliency indicator of global satisfaction. Self-esteem is crucial for overall life satisfaction. A person with a healthy level of self-esteem is likely to have a more positive outlook on life, contributing to global satisfaction and emotion resilience. Our last essential skill is self-efficacy. This is when kids think, I can make a difference, instead of thinking, nothing I do matters. Some of the things you can do to help foster self-efficacy is helping your kid appraise their capabilities realistically. So kids who act on faulty self-evaluations are more likely to fail. So it's okay to be open and honest with kids who have dyslexia or ADHD or some other learning disability. I know some parents worry about if their kid finds out that they have this disability, and they don't want to discourage them or don't want to upset them by letting them know these things. Instead, we can let them know these things and phrase it as, you may struggle in these areas because of this, but let's talk about things that you're really great at. Sometimes our weaknesses are also areas that make it us succeed in other areas. So focusing on those strengths instead of those deficits. We also want to be sure to provide opportunities for our kids from a very early age to contribute to the family. Kids as young as 2 can help do things like sort and match socks or put them away, wipe off the table, dust. Kids are never too young to start contributing to the family, which Love and Logic focuses a lot on those family contributions, which can also be another way to talk about chores, and how everyone should have some responsibility in maintaining the household. And these should be things that we do without getting paid. If they go above and beyond their responsibilities and do things like paint the fence, clean the garage, cut the grass, things that are above their expectations, and that's when allowances can be given for things. But when it comes to our typical family contributions that we do, for Love and Logic, we don't give allowances for those things. Chores are a really great way for kids to build that sense of self-efficacy, as well as a great way to work on work ethic. Things we want to avoid are letting our own anxieties get in the way of our children doing things that they're capable of. Sometimes parents don't want to let their kids walk to school with their friends or ride their bike to their friend's house, not because they're not capable of it and aren't going to be able to be safe, but because our anxieties get in the way of letting them do those things. And, we have that fear of, if they're out of my sight, something's going to happen. And not having that constant communication and connection can be hard sometimes for parents. So we want to stop and think, is this something that's really going to harm them, or is it more about my worry that I have that's preventing you from letting them do this? Also, I've seen this manifest in schools with parents saying their kids with smart devices. So in littles, it can be the smart watches. For older kids, it can be iPhones, right? Or smartphones. And that's a way that we can track them, and that helps soothe our anxiety, and being able to get into communication and contact with them, right? That's a lot of times it's stemming from us. So this goes back to us managing our anxiety, and not necessarily about helping the kids. And unfortunately, sometimes these anxieties get passed down from us adults and projected onto the kids because we're sending these messages of, you're not safe if I'm not watching you, if I don't know where you are, if I can't get into contact with you. And it becomes kind of this safety net and this leash, right? Last, we want to avoid protecting our kids from failure. Kids need to fail so that they can learn how to persevere. It's how they develop grit. They also are figuring out what works and what doesn't work. So it's okay if they have a conflict with a friend, if they've had a bad day at school, if they failed a test, something didn't go well for them. It helps them develop these skills and learn that they can be more effective. This ties into the indicator on the Sharps metrics of hope, self-efficacy, or the belief that one's ability to achieve a goal directly connects to hope. Individuals who feel capable of meeting challenges are more likely to maintain a hopeful attitude and keep striving towards their goal. So that concludes our 7 essential skills from Madeline Levine. And I do want to leave you with some reflection questions to contemplate where you are in some of these areas. So asking yourself, are there times where I step in too quickly? Are there some areas where I can give my child more independence to help build that self-efficacy and self-esteem? And what about might cause some anxiety to some of y'all, which I want you to sit with it if it does, but think about, how involved are you in your child's academics? Are you tracking all of their grades and assignments and making sure that they get everything done and turned in on time? And what would happen if we gave that control over to them and stepped in only when they asked for help and we're like, hey, I'm really overwhelmed. I have 5 projects due. I need help organizing or figuring out my schedule. And thinking for yourself, is it better for them to learn these lessons of what happens when they don't keep up and now, when it's affordable, and when they're off on their own in college and you're not around to help them out, or when they're on a job and these mistakes are no longer as affordable? And I also want you to keep in mind too, like as our kids get older, their problems get bigger, and it is harder for us to resist the urge to step in. Especially when those mistakes stop feeling as affordable and they have bigger consequences. A big part of Love and Logic is, letting them learn how to deal with those consequences. Some questions that we get are asking things like, if my kid is older now, like how do I build this resiliency? I would say it's never too late to build these skills, even if you have an adult child, right? You can start interacting differently, putting different boundaries in. I'm thinking about, where are some places where I rescue them and I don't allow them to problem solve? How can I give over some of that responsibility to them and not own it as my own? And also, talking about, if we are giving our child, these kids are these opportunities of growth, but maybe they struggle with anxiety and you see these anxiety spikes, how to handle that. And I would say part of that is first making sure we have that foundation of that self-soothing that we talked about. So making sure, they have some coping skills and strategies and planning for that worry, which comes from a really easy read and great if you have some anxious kids, but Anxious Kids, Anxious Parents is a lovely book. But planning for that worry. And so you can sit down and have a plan with them of like, hey, these are the responsibilities I'm going to hand over to you. You get to, solve this problem with your friend. And if your anxiety starts to come up, because we know whenever you have to have conversations with people and those difficult conversations, the worry bug starts to pop up, let's plan for things that you can do in that moment. And you can plan ahead of time for them. And in the moment, if they need some help, you can just remind them of like, you've got this. Remember the skills we talked about? Okay, you tell me what we talked about and what you can do in this situation. and any opportunity that you can to push it back on them of, hey, here's what you're struggling with. What are some of your options? And helping them think through that. All right, here's the resources and the books that we pulled from the 7 essential skills, or from that top one, the Teach Your Children Well. And we also pulled from various other ones. But thank you for joining us.